On the outskirts of a quiet Ohio town where the freeway hums like a faraway river and forgotten neighborhoods sag under the weight of time, a boy named Ethan Moore walked alone through the dark. He was 15, tall for his age, with hands calloused far too young. In one pocket, a wrench. In the other, a plan. He wasn't going home tonight. He hadn't really had a home in years. The house where Ethan lived was more a place he slept than a place he belonged. His mother had passed when he was 10. Since then, he'd bounced through 2 foster homes and landed with Roy, his mother's half-brother, and the last name left on a faded legal form. Roy was a man hardened by old military rules and softened by cheap liquor. He didn't ask questions as long as Ethan didn't ask for anything. Dinner, when it happened, was microwaved silence. Conversations, when they came, were short, sharp, and usually ended with a slammed door. Roy wasn't cruel exactly, just empty. And being invisible in your own house starts to hurt in ways you can't explain. Ethan had learned to disappear early. He knew how to move across creaky floorboards without a sound. He breathed shallow when the yelling started, and he stopped trying to explain himself a long time ago. But on this night, he wasn't hiding, he was searching. A week of rain had turned the old Henderson scrapyard into a swamp, the kind of place that kept people out, which was perfect because Ethan needed time. He moved past broken stoves and gutted trucks, his boots sinking into the mud with every step. His backpack rattled with tools he'd borrowed permanently from the school's auto shop, tools nobody would miss. He carried a small flashlight, but mostly he moved by memory. This place had become familiar. He'd been coming here for nearly a month, building something from nothing. At the far edge of the yard stood a collapsed shed with a half-roof still clinging to the frame. That was his workshop. Inside, a pile of salvaged parts, a bent handlebar, mismatched cables, a rusted gas tank leaning against a wall of old tires. To anyone else, it looked like trash, but to Ethan, it was possibility. He wasn't trying to build the fastest bike. He didn't care if it was pretty. It just needed to run, long enough to get him away. Maybe south, where the winters didn't bite so hard. Maybe somewhere nobody would ask about paperwork or custody, just a road and freedom. He didn't even have a license, but what he did have was resolve, and a mind that refused to stop working, even when the rest of the world gave up on him. He'd studied repair manuals from the public library, memorized every diagram until he could see the wiring paths when he closed his eyes. He knew what he needed most, a frame, the skeleton, the part everything else would hold on to. He dug through piles of metal for days, fingers raw, nails black with grime. But tonight felt different, like something was waiting. At the far fence line, under a stack of roofing panels and waterlogged lumber, something caught the light. Just a curve at first, a line too smooth to be random. Curious, Ethan dropped to his knees and began clearing debris. Rain-soaked wood groaned under his grip. Beneath it all, half buried in cold mud, was a motorcycle frame, sleek, elegant, with curves that didn't belong in a junkyard. It looked like it had been made by someone who cared. The welds were smooth, the proportions balanced. Even under rust and age, it had dignity. No badge, no markings, just presence. Ethan ran his hand along the top tube, heart thudding. It didn't match anything he'd seen before. It felt rare. He tried to lift it, but it was too heavy. He'd need a lever, maybe some rope. Still, he knew this wasn't just scrap. It was a beginning, a piece of something larger than himself. He wasn't alone in that moment, but he didn't know it yet. Somewhere behind him, footsteps stirred the mud. Another life was about to collide with his, and nothing, not the bike, not the boy, would ever be the same again. The footsteps came slow, steady, boots pressing deep into the mud. Ethan turned, heart pounding. A man stood a few yards away, holding a flashlight low by his side. He was older,
gray at the beard, with a lined face that had known years of wind and road.
A faded leather vest hung over a black t-shirt, the kind with sleeves cut off and stories stitched into every scratch. But the man didn't look angry, just curious. "Easy," he said, his voice calm, not commanding. "Didn't mean to startle you. I was dropping off some old batteries. Saw your light." Ethan blinked, realizing his phone screen was still glowing faintly in his jacket pocket. He muttered something about it being a mistake, but the man was already shining his flashlight down at the frame in the mud. The man crouched beside it, silent for a long time. Then he spoke, almost like a whisper. "Do you know what you've got here?" Ethan shook his head. He'd stopped asking questions that made adults uncomfortable a long time ago. "This," the man said, brushing a hand along the rusted top bar, "is a Vincent Black Lightning, 1952 if I had to guess. Fastest production motorcycle of its time. People spend their whole lives dreaming of finding one of these." Ethan stared at the frame, not sure whether to believe him. "It's just a pile of metal," he said. The man chuckled, but it wasn't mocking. "Son, this isn't just a machine. It's a piece of history." He stood up and offered his hand. "Name's Walter. I work out of a garage across town, part of a group called the Iron Ridge Brotherhood. You got a plan for this thing?" Ethan hesitated. "I was trying to build a bike, just to get away." Walter nodded slowly, the way someone does when they've heard more truth in one sentence than most people say in a week. "You got a place to take it?" Ethan shook his head. "Then let's get it out of the mud." They came back the next afternoon with a flatbed truck and a crew of 3. The garage wasn't much to look at from the outside, a squat concrete building with chipped paint, 2 garage bays, and a worn hand-painted sign that read Iron Ridge Motorworks. But inside it felt different. It smelled of warm oil, strong coffee, and something that felt like belonging. Music played low from a radio in the corner. Wrenches clinked against metal. People moved with purpose. Walter introduced Ethan to the crew. First was Joe, tall, quiet, with silver at his temples and arms like steel beams. He didn't talk much, just nodded once. Then came Carla, lean, sharp-eyed, with tattoos along both arms and a voice that didn't waste words. She managed the books and the space and made it clear that chaos didn't survive long in her presence. Tommy arrived last, a younger man with a wide grin and a motor mouth to match. He talked about auction sites, rare parts, and a guy in Texas who once traded an engine block for a guitar. Ethan stood awkwardly at the edge of the workbench as they laid the Vincent frame under the light. Up close, it looked worse than he remembered. Rust clung like scars. Welds were cracked. Suspension mounts were seized. Joe ran a hand down one side and grunted. "This'll take months." Walter replied, "We've got time." Then he turned to Ethan. "You ready to work?" The answer came easy. Yes. From that day forward, Ethan lived in that garage more than anywhere else. He swept floors, organized tools, and learned how not to tear up his knuckles with a wire brush. Joe showed him how to read the grain of metal, how to know where it would crack under stress. Carla taught him to label every part, to take photos during disassembly so they could trace it all back. "Order matters," she said. "Respect the process or the project will eat itself." Tommy somehow found original bolts from a collector in Oregon and brake drums from a barn in Kentucky. "Every piece is a story," he told Ethan. "You just got to know who to call." The bike started to come alive, but so did something inside Ethan. For the first time in years, people spoke to him without suspicion. No one asked where he came from or why he wasn't in school. They handed him tools and expected him to use them. They told him jokes, shared their food, and treated him not like a problem, but like a person. One night, Ethan sat on the edge of the workbench long after the others had gone. The frame sat before him, cleaner now, solid, beginning to shine beneath the shop lights.
His fingers traced the curve of the metal, not out of ownership, but out of respect. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was something they were building together. And maybe it was building something in him, too. By the third week, the garage no longer felt like just a place to work. It felt like a place to breathe. Ethan was no longer just the quiet kid in the corner. He had grease on his hands, new calluses on his fingers, and a rhythm that followed him through the day. Strip bolts in the morning, polish metal in the afternoon, and at night, sometimes, he sat and sketched in an old notebook someone had left behind. Pages now filled with engine layouts, gear ratios, and dreams he hadn't yet learned how to say out loud. It was Carla who brought up the question no one had asked yet. One evening, as she reviewed inventory sheets and double-checked parts numbers, she looked over the rim of her glasses and said, "Has anyone checked the serial on that frame?" Walter nodded slowly. "We're getting to it." But Ethan felt a jolt in his chest. It hadn't occurred to him that the bike might have a past bigger than just the rust and the mud. That night, Samantha came by. She was sharp-eyed, calm-spoken, and always seemed to know more than she let on. She'd once been an investigative reporter, the kind that made corrupt men nervous. Now she handled the club's legal work and part-time consulting. When she heard about the Vincent, she didn't say much. She just opened her laptop, pulled out a flashlight, and crouched by the bike. The serial number was still visible on the neck, worn but readable. She took photos from 3 angles, checked for matching numbers on the engine block, then stood up and said, "Give me 48 hours." True to her word, Samantha came back 2 days later, her face unreadable. The crew gathered around the workbench. Ethan stood near the wall, unsure if he should even be part of the conversation. But Walter waved him over and said gently, "This is yours too, kid." Samantha opened her laptop and pulled up a document. This bike was manufactured in 1952, originally sold to a private collector in Connecticut, a man named Howard Garrison. It was part of a rare European motorcycle collection. According to estate records, the bike was reported stolen during a break-in in 1983. The room fell quiet. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Is it still listed as stolen?" Joe asked. "No," Samantha replied. "Garrison passed away a few years after the theft. He had no listed heirs. The estate was closed out, and the missing items were written off. There's no active claim. The bike changed hands at least twice over the next decade, off the books, no titles, all cash. Eventually, it wound up in a barn in rural Pennsylvania. That barn burned down in the late 90s. Some bikes were salvaged. Most were presumed destroyed. My guess is someone sold this one for scrap and didn't know or didn't care what it was." "So," Walter asked, "what does that mean?" Samantha's tone was steady, matter-of-fact. "It means the bike is legally abandoned property. Under Ohio salvage law, and in the absence of a valid claim, it belongs to the person who recovered and restored it." She turned to Ethan. "That's you." Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared at her. He'd never owned anything that mattered. Not a room, not a coat, not even a proper place at the dinner table. And now, someone was telling him this rare, beautiful machine, the one he'd pulled from the mud and helped bring back to life, was legally his. But the news didn't sit long before trouble found them. It was late Thursday evening when Roy showed up. The garage doors were open, warm light spilling onto the parking lot. Ethan was inside with Walter, adjusting the carburetor, when the voice came from outside, loud, slurred, and angry. "I know he's in there! Ethan, get out here right now!" Walter's shoulders tensed. "Stay put," he said, but Ethan was already moving toward the door, not to hide, not this time. He'd spent too many years running from things he should have stood up to. Roy stood in the lot, swaying slightly, breath heavy with liquor, eyes glassy with rage. Behind him, Joe stepped out silently, arms folded. Carla appeared near the side entrance. Tommy blocked the drive with his frame. Roy didn't seem to care.
"You think you can just run off and play mechanic with these people?" he barked. "That bike, anything you found while living under my roof, is mine."
Ethan stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "You didn't take care of me. I bought my own food with the money my mom left. You drank the rest. You didn't ask if I was okay. You never came to check if I was sleeping on the floor. I was just there. That doesn't make you my guardian." "You're a minor," Roy snapped. "You don't get to decide what's yours." "That's not entirely true," Samantha said, stepping into the light. She held a folder in one hand, calm as always. "I pulled your file from county records. Ethan's mother named you as temporary care in her will, but you never completed the legal guardianship process, which means you don't have legal custody, no authority, no claim to him or the bike." Roy's face flushed, then paled. "This isn't over." "Yes," Joe said, stepping closer. "It is." Walter and Tommy moved in without a word. Roy backed away, cursing under his breath, then turned and walked to his truck. The engine roared to life, but he never looked back. And just like that, Ethan stood taller. He wasn't hiding behind anyone. He was standing beside them, not owned, not abandoned, not alone. By Saturday morning, the air around the garage felt different. There was a quiet buzz beneath the usual sounds of sockets turning and metal shifting. Ethan had barely slept the night before. He kept waking up to double-check the bike, as if it might disappear before morning came. The Vincent sat on its stand in the center of the garage, polished and gleaming, black paint smooth like glass, chrome details catching the light like stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. It was alive. Walter had adjusted the timing that morning. Carla had reviewed the part documentation one last time. Joe gave the throttle a final test, muttering something about symmetry. Even Tommy had stopped talking long enough to wipe down the fuel tank twice. This wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a testimony. Every bolt, every weld, every decision, built by a group of people who had no reason to come together, except that they did.
Around noon, a black SUV pulled into the lot. The man who stepped out didn't look like what Ethan expected. No suit, no sunglasses, just a simple pair of jeans, a clean white shirt, and a navy jacket that fit him just right. His hair was silver, combed back with care, and his smile was the kind people remembered. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. No first name, no big entrance, just presence. He circled the Vincent slowly, hands behind his back. He didn't speak at first, just studied the frame, the lines, the way it sat on its tires. When he finally looked up, he asked the question Ethan had been waiting for. "Tell me about it." So Ethan did. He told him about the night he found the frame half buried in mud, about sneaking out, about the noise in the house he never called home, about the way the bike had felt different, even when it was nothing but rust and memory. He told him about Walter, about the people who taught him how to work with his hands, how to think like a mechanic, and how to stop flinching when someone raised their voice. He didn't cry, he didn't dramatize, he just told the truth. Mr. Harrison listened with the kind of silence that mattered. When Ethan finished, the man looked over at Jude and Carla, then back to Ethan. "I'm offering $52,000, he said simply. "But not just for the bike. I want to help make sure this young man gets what he needs. He deserves a future." Walter stepped forward, about to respond, but Mr. Harrison raised one hand. "The garage keeps what it needs: rent, debts, supplies. The rest goes into a trust, held until Ethan turns 18, unless you think something else would be better." Ethan glanced at Samantha, who nodded slowly.
A trust is smart, she said, protects the funds, gives him options later. Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at the Vincent, the bike that had once been a skeleton, now a statement. He looked around at the people who made it real, people who had asked nothing of him but effort and honesty. Then he looked at Mr. Harrison and said, "Start with the garage. Pay off what they need. I wouldn't have this without them. That comes first."
Joe reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not paying us back, son. You're building with us." Mr. Harrison smiled. "Then we have a deal." The following week moved fast. Papers were signed, funds transferred. Samantha handled every detail with clinical precision. The garage paid off its back rent, settled the last of its legal fees, and restocked parts without needing to borrow. For the first time in months, the ledger didn't bleed red. And Ethan? Ethan opened his first bank account, a trust, just like they said. Carla helped him set a savings plan. Walter gave him a toolbox with his initials carved into the handle. It wasn't about money. It was about place, about permanence. One afternoon, a week after the sale, the crew cleared out a corner of the garage. There was a workbench there now, a clean stool, a pegboard for tools. On the top drawer of the cabinet, someone had taped a label in block letters, Ethan's Bay. Next to the bench stood a new frame, bare metal, simple lines, nothing fancy, but full of potential. Walter handed him a sketchbook, thick with blank pages. "Start drawing," he said. "Next one's yours. We'll build it when you're ready." Ethan nodded, throat tight. He opened the book and pressed his pencil to the page. Behind him, the garage hummed with life. Classic rock on the radio, someone arguing over carb settings, someone else laughing too loud. It didn't matter. It was music. It was family. He didn't run anymore. He didn't need to. Because sometimes what saves you isn't what you find. It's who finds you.